Time has a way of rewriting public perceptions. Sarah Ferguson, once a constant presence in royal headlines, now walks a path far removed from the glittering corridors of Buckingham Palace. But appearances can be deceiving. Beneath the poised smiles and carefully curated appearances lies a story of resilience, reinvention, and subtle defiance. What does the Duchess of York look like in 2026, not just physically but emotionally and psychologically? And perhaps more intriguingly, what secrets has she carried for decades, hidden from the eyes of the world? Every photograph, every interview, every public gesture is only part of the story. The real narrative unfolds in the shadows, in moments the cameras never capture. As we trace her journey from royal spotlight to modern independence, the question lingers. Are we seeing the real Sarah Ferguson, or merely the persona she allows the world to witness? Sarah Ferguson's ascent into the public consciousness was meteoric. Born into a life of relative privilege, her marriage into the House of Windsor at age 20 propelled her into a world of tradition, expectation, and relentless scrutiny. Overnight, she became more than a young woman entering matrimony. She became a symbol, a subject for tabloids, a living artifact of British royalty. Every smile, every gesture, every choice of dress was examined, dissected, and criticized. Photographers and journalists documented her every move, transforming private life into public spectacle. But what happens when the cameras stop focusing? When the corridors of Buckingham Palace grow quiet, and the public eye moves on to the next scandal or headline? Behind the carefully staged appearances lay an intense psychological pressure. Former aides recall a woman constantly aware of judgment, of the need to perform, to appease, and to reconcile personal identity with imposed expectations. Photographers noted fleeting moments. A tired glance in the mirror, a pause too long at a dinner table, subtle gestures that suggested weariness beneath the poised exterior. Historians argue that Ferguson's early years in the palace were a psychological crucible. Her choices, often scrutinized as personal failings, were shaped by conflicting demands, the rigid protocols of the monarchy and her own human desire for autonomy and happiness. The tension between privilege and isolation became a defining element of her early adulthood, creating cracks that the public narrative seldom acknowledged. Even decades later, these pressures echo in the woman seen in 2026. The question remains, how did these early struggles shape the person she would become, and what secrets has she carried quietly in the shadows of royal life? By the late 2010s, Ferguson's life had begun to shift dramatically. No longer defined solely by her association with the royal family, she embarked on a path of reinvention. Philanthropy became a central focus, alongside writing and media projects that allowed her to redefine her public identity on her own terms. Yet this reinvention was as much psychological as it was professional. Analysts observed subtle changes in her demeanor, style, and the tone of her public statements. There was a measured confidence, a sharpness in her observations, a willingness to control narrative in a way that had been impossible under royal scrutiny. Behind the scenes, advisors described a woman both guarded and strategic, acutely aware that perception could wield as much influence as the deeds themselves. Every public appearance, every interview, every retreat into privacy became a calculated move in a complex game of self-definition and survival. Psychologists note that such a transformation is rarely simple. Reinvention after decades under public scrutiny requires the ability to confront past failures, to reconcile personal desires with imposed expectations, and to cultivate resilience in the face of judgment. Ferguson's journey illustrates not only adaptability but also subtle defiance, an insistence on controlling her narrative despite the weight of decades-long public observation. Yet even as she reclaimed autonomy, questions lingered. What pressures drove this transformation? And to what extent did she shield her personal identity from a public eager to define her on its own terms? The path of reinvention, though visible in her actions, concealed layers of unseen negotiation and quiet, deliberate change. For royals, aging is never private. Every wrinkle, every hairstyle, every cosmetic choice is amplified by tabloids, social media, and the unyielding lens of public expectation. Sarah Ferguson's transition into her 60s was no exception. Experts in psychology and media perception emphasize the intricate interplay of self-confidence, societal expectation, and public image. For someone like Ferguson, the stakes were higher. Every visible sign of age was subject to scrutiny, often accompanied by speculation about relevance, influence, and personal vitality. Yet beneath these observations lies a more profound story, one of adaptation and quiet defiance. Subtle cues, composed expressions, deliberate fashion choices, the timing of public appearances, suggest a strategic approach to navigating this environment. Ferguson demonstrates resilience not merely through appearances, but through an internal recalibration, redefining priorities, asserting agency, and resisting the ageist narratives that often dominate media discussions of women in their later decades. Psychologists note this as a classic form of self-preservation, balancing authenticity with the calculated navigation of public perception. This chapter examines the tension between expectation and reality, showing a woman who refuses to surrender to either public pressure or private insecurity. Yet one question persists. Can anyone truly escape the gaze of a world that has long been obsessed with youth and beauty? Ferguson's path suggests the answer is neither simple nor absolute. Life outside the palace was not without challenge. In the early 2000s, Ferguson faced financial difficulties that tested her independence and exposed vulnerabilities previously hidden behind royal glamour. Missteps were public, analyzed with a harshness rarely afforded to private citizens. Yet she persisted, seeking ways to regain control and restore stability. Investments, media ventures, and carefully curated projects provided the scaffolding for a comeback. Analysts note that Ferguson's financial decisions reflect more than monetary recovery. They signify psychological reclamation. Autonomy, they argue, is inseparable from security. Reclaiming financial agency became a symbol of self-determination and personal empowerment. Each step of this journey reflects a balance between vulnerability and strategic foresight. Choices that might seem transactional in public view often concealed layers of negotiation, foresight, and emotional resilience. Advisors describe her as fiercely deliberate, learning to convert past failures into platforms for future stability. Yet even as financial security was restored, one question lingers. Does monetary independence equate to freedom, or do invisible chains, shaped by past public scrutiny, family dynamics, and personal expectations, continue to constrain her? While public attention often fixated on marriages and family drama, Ferguson's private life remained a complex tapestry, carefully shielded from external gaze. Those close to her emphasize her desire to control narrative, using seclusion and selective appearances as protective strategies. Psychologists suggest that Ferguson's experiences honed emotional intelligence, enabling her to navigate relationships with nuance and subtlety. Friends, family members, and even professional colleagues describe a woman capable of managing conflict, asserting boundaries, and preserving dignity under pressure. The ability to compartmentalize public and private identities became essential, allowing her to thrive despite external scrutiny. Even casual observers might overlook the depth of negotiation and resilience required to maintain such equilibrium. Ferguson's private life suggests a narrative of survival and empowerment, a calculated orchestration of appearances and decisions that allows her to live authentically while minimizing exposure to judgment and intrusion. The lingering question remains: could these private transformations hint at a radically different version of Sarah Ferguson than the world has long assumed? Ferguson's life has always existed in contrast, public admiration mingling with relentless critique. Media narratives rarely capture nuance, often exaggerating flaws or simplifying complex dynamics. Social media compounds the distortion, reinforcing cognitive biases that influence public perception. Experts point out that Ferguson has learned to navigate these dynamics subtly, sometimes embracing, sometimes resisting the expectations imposed upon her. Observers note key moments in 2025 and early 2026, interviews, appearances, and photographs that reveal both alignment and dissonance between public image and private reality. Her controlled gestures, deliberate tone, and selective disclosures all speak to a nuanced understanding of perception as power. The tension between who she is, who she wants to be, and who the world believes her to be forms the heart of this chapter. Ferguson's ongoing management of public scrutiny reflects a sophisticated psychological balancing act, preserving authenticity while responding strategically to external pressures. Yet the question persists: when perception clashes with reality, which version truly defines a person? Ferguson's story suggests that the line between image and essence is often thin, blurred, and contested. By 2026, Sarah Ferguson has emerged as a figure of layered complexity. Public appearances and media snapshots depict someone grounded yet enigmatic, blending decades of experience with an enduring charisma. But the essence of her story lies beyond optics. Emotional resilience, strategic self-possession, and the quiet mastery of narrative. Psychologists, historians, and media analysts converge on one conclusion: Ferguson's journey is defined by adaptation and survival. Each trial, reinvention, and public misstep has been absorbed, processed, and repurposed to construct a persona that is both authentic and controlled. Her current image, how she looks, behaves, and asserts herself, is inseparable from lessons learned in the shadows of royal life. The final reflection is both stark and provocative. In a world obsessed with appearances, with youth, and with scandal, Ferguson demonstrates that survival is an art. Yet even as the cameras flash and opinions swirl, a lingering uncertainty remains. How much of the real Sarah Ferguson will the world ever truly see? Her story, in all its grit and nuance, reminds us that the truth of a person is often layered, hidden, and only partially visible, even to those who think they know her best.